Thank you. Now, we know that because the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said that we built this tunnel, way back in the 80s.
I believe he's. Oh, hold on. No.
It's okay.
Hold on, Saeed. If you're going to say something, I get to respond. He said that they built the bunker.
Right.
I don't think he said that. Expected that bunker to be used by
Right.
fighters
Okay.
as where civilians are on top as human shields. Those are very, just because you build something doesn't mean you expect it to be used by a terrorist organization hiding behind civilians. So it doesn't really matter who built the initial
Well,
bunker.
I think the evidence is quite thin on that. But anyway, let me ask you a couple of things.
So I can't let that go by. I can't let that go by without saying something. If you believe the evidence is quite thin, fine. But we remain quite convinced about what Al-Shifa was used for. And I'll say, saw the cache of weapons, saw the cache of ammunition, and ultimately, as I said, are quite confident based on what we know that Hamas was operating under that hospital, which again, I don't think is a very controversial statement. I think it's pretty well established. Remember, we did have that exchange where you asked me to send articles, and I sent you the articles, not from the U.S. government, but from independent news outlets documenting.
Do you have any evidence at all that any of the supplies that the U.S. put into Gaza pre-October 7th were used or this administration, previous administrations were used?
Supplies in what?
Construction material, that kind of thing.
Not that I have seen.
No. So none of the money and none of the money and none of the
Not that I have seen. No.
that went in.
Not
Can-
not that I have
May I
seen.
just follow
Go
up with
ahead.
my questions? Now, you said that Israel's goal, a legitimate goal, as you called it, is to make sure that Hamas is unable to conduct anything similar to October. But I thought the stated goals early on were to decapitate Hamas, hunt its leaders, and basically, really free the hostages, and have a new regime. Have they achieved that? So are we shifting goals now?
We are not shifting goals. Obviously, they have not achieved the release of all the hostages, which again, as I've said before, is
Or
not
any
so.
of them? Or any of them? Or any of them by I'm saying
there have been over 100
through
hostage
negotiations, but not by force.
They did also execute a military operation quite early on where they rescued a hostage. But I don't think I don't think we should put the fact that Hamas continues to hold civilians hostage on the Israeli government. It's Hamas that bears responsibility for that.
All right. I wanted to ask you also, you said that nothing short of Hamas surrender, that's the suggestion, would end this conflict. That's in response
So
to-
again, that's not the suggestion.
All right, let me rephrase.
That's not what I said. So
Okay.
go ahead.
In response to Matt, you said that, when he said that, stopping the bombing could also save Palestinian lives or something to that effect. And you said Hamas could surrender and end it, right? So nothing short of Hamas total surrender could end the bombing. That's what I just wanted you to clarify this point.
that is not what I said. I've made clear before that Israel is conducting legitimate military objectives that we believe are achievable, and capturing or killing the senior leadership of Hamas is achievable. But it's not the only way to achieve that. And my point in saying that about Hamas surrendering is that for all the questions we get, legitimate questions that we are happy to answer about Israel's military activities, it is Hamas that started this conflict. It is Hamas that hides behind civilians, and it is Hamas that could end it today if the people who were responsible for the murder of 1,200 civilians would come out and take responsibility for their actions and surrender and stop hiding behind civilians as human shields.
Okay, well, first of all, the 1,200 include 311 soldiers, as Israel suggested. So they're not all civilians. But anyway, that's what they said.
don't believe the murder of
I'm
civilians
with you.
on
I'm just
October
saying,
7th was justified
just to
either.
correct.
I don't think we need to caveat it.
Right, okay.
Caveat
But let me ask you something. How would this surrender, take shape? Because Hamas is not an army. It's not like we're not going to see what we saw, let's say, the Iraqis do in that famous tent and so on, or what the Japanese did on board of an American ship. So how would this surrender take shape? Would all fighters need to come out and lay their arms, all of them? We don't know how many of them, maybe 10,000, whatever, so they come and they say, now we surrender. Is that the shape, is that the form of surrender that you are asking?
So let me give you a start. Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, could come up from his tunnel today, could lay down his arms and surrender himself and take responsibility. Now, I don't have any notion that he is about to do that.
Right.
He hasn't shown that he cares one whit for the Palestinian public up to date. So I have no reason to believe he would do that. But I make the point to, again, reinforce that Hamas does bear some responsibility, a great deal of responsibility for what happened here as the person who started this conflict in the first place.
And my last
There's the
question on
entity
the
that started this
journalists, the
conflict.
number of journalists. A lot of journalists have been killed, maybe 90 and so on. Do you have any doubt that that Israel intentionally targets journalists?
So we have not seen evidence that
So-
Israel, let me,
Yeah.
usual rule, let me finish. We have not seen any evidence that Israel is intentionally targeting journalists. Obviously, we have seen dozens of journalists die as a result of this conflict. Saw one, Samer Abu Daqqa
Right.
from Al Jazeera, who was just
Right.
killed in recent days.
Right.
And as we have said before, we mourn every journalist who has given their life in covering this conflict and bringing information to the American public and to people all around the world. We think the work that the Free Press does is critical to a democracy, especially in conflict zones where, unfortunately, far too many do pay this sacrifice, and our condolences go out to all of their families. And there are cases where, when we have seen actions that we thought warranted, we have raised questions with the Israeli government and sought more information. You saw us do that with respect to the Reuters journalist who was killed in Lebanon, and we will continue to do so. And we will continue to encourage Israel to comply with their own rules of engagement and comply with international humanitarian law. And if we ever see signs that they are not, we will of course be very clear about that with them.
So
Go ahead. Let me, last one, Saeed, because there are a lot of other people.
You mentioned Samer Abu Daqqa. I mean, he was bleeding there for like 6 hours, and they sent in a crew to retrieve him. They were all shot dead. So they knew exactly where he was and what he was bleeding right there. People are trying to reach and retrieve him, and the Israeli army disallowed them from doing that. So wouldn't that be intentional?
So again, as always, it's very difficult for me to comment from specific facts here. We're in an extremely challenging information space when you see different accounts about activities on the ground. But as I said, we continue to be clear with Israel that they must comply with all international humanitarian law. Go ahead.